Hey, good morning, everybody. We're so glad that you could join us wherever you're at, no matter what you're doing, whether you're watching or listening. Today, we're going to be talking about something that's been on a lot of people's minds. And today we are starting our Be Rich campaign, which I'm going to talk more about at the end of the message. But sometimes you got to go back to the basics. Because there's been a lot of questions on people's minds, right? I've gotten this over and over, and I know lots of pastors have been told since the beginning of this whole COVID-19 thing. They've been asking lots of questions about the end time, right? Is this a sign that Jesus is about to return? Is this the beginning of the end? Is this the apocalypse? Is this God's judgment on America or the world, or is it? Aaron, do you think that God is trying to get our attention, right? Whoever is, the world's attention, our nation's attention, our state's attention, is God trying to do that? Is God calling us as a nation to repent? To repent from our sin, and if we do that, then he'll remove the virus. People have been asking that. Let me just tell you, praying and repenting of sin is never, ever, ever a bad idea. Right? Unless it becomes a distraction from the main thing, right? And it's not really about me repenting and turning away from my sin. It's about you and everybody else. And people have been asking these questions based on this worldview that they've been presented with or left with, or it's been left behind for them, or it's somehow they got it. And let me tell you, we hear even more of these, right? Oh, is the vaccine the mark of the beast, right? Should I take it or not? Should I follow these mandates? What if and let me tell you, I have far more questions than I do answers. I have far more questions. But most of the time when I start focusing on those questions, right, and my brain begins to dwell on them, my brain begins to just churn, I have to get brought back, right? Somebody has to ask me a question. Somebody has to present an issue or a problem that kind of refocuses me, that brings me back. And a guy named Andy Stanley, he's a pastor in Atlanta, he asked a question. Are all of those other questions the real question? And that was good. That was good for me to hear. It was good for me to think about. Because sometimes we get all wrapped up in these other questions, right? And they aren't the most helpful questions. And so he asked the question, what is the most important question in all this? How did the early church respond? Is what he brought out to me. How did the early church respond whenever they faced natural disaster, when they faced calamity, when they faced issues? Now, just as a caveat, the early church didn't get it perfect. They didn't always get it right? We don't, a lot of times we romanticize, and it was hard. It was a lot of hard things, and that's why many of the letters of the New Testament were written by Paul and others. Like, hey, you're not getting it right, but they did get a lot right. They got a lot right. And as J. Vernon McGee said, the Bible sheds enormous light on the commentaries. Sometimes we get so wrapped up in the message of what's in our own minds that we forget that there are a lot of answers in the Bible that aren't even prescriptive. They're simply descriptive, right? They describe how the church handled these type of things. And so when we look at first century Christians, and we look at our understanding of how they thought about things and their understanding of history and people, right? That it helps. It helps to see how they dealt with things. Well, one of the questions that maybe we should be asking, I don't even know if it's the main question, but one is, why do Americans have such a low pain threshold? We do. Let's just be honest. I do. And probably you do. And if you don't think you do, talk to your grandpa, right? Talk to your grandma. If you still don't think you do, go visit other countries. I mean, I have been able to visit all over the world, helping like with Johnny and friends. We went down to Peru and we helped people with disabilities in Peru, right? And wow, right? We went to India. You've never seen poverty until you've been other places. And it's not that we don't have it here. We just have a really, really low pain threshold. And it's. I mean, I think we know why, right? We expect to be, like we deserve to be treated a certain way. Or we feel like we have the right to do whatever we want. I mean, we have a lot of things. We're blessed, we're protected, we're resourced, and that makes us have a low pain threshold, right? To the point where fistfights break out over all kinds of things, and we've seen it a lot during COVID. I mean, where people just get mad, where people make, life-altering decisions based on a little bit of this and a little bit of that, right? And so what happens is we see that individual rights take precedent over personal responsibility. And this isn't new. This stuff isn't new. It's been happening a long time, right? And so some people will say, well, because that is happening, the end is near. And let me just say, the apocalypse might be on the horizon. It might be. And that's okay. If it is, it is. We can't control it. We can't stop it. We can't make it faster or slower. And here's the other thing. You can't create and pass or enforce all the laws necessary to ensure the peaceful coexistence in a culture where personal responsibility takes a back seat to personal freedom. It can't be all about you and all about me at the same time. It just can't. Somebody has to give. Somebody has to give. Somebody has to surrender personal freedom, or chaos ensues. And the notion of personal freedom strikes us a little bit. It strikes me a little bit as un-American. But we do it all the time. Or at least I hope you do, right? I mean, every time you wait in the line at the grocery store, you give up a little bit of your personal freedom for personal responsibility. I mean, you do that. We all do that. You raise your kids. You raise your kids to give up a little bit of that of their freedom to be responsible. Hey, you can. I know you want to play with that. It's your toy. You have to share, right? You have to take some personal responsibility. Right, or else, if we force someone else to take responsibility for our irresponsibility, that can only go on for so long. And so our varied theologies, our various worldviews, our various fascinations, with all their intriguing and interesting facets, right? All of those questions that come to our mind about freedom and responsibility and the apocalypse, and is it this kind of sign? Is it that kind of sign? They should all take a back seat. They should all take a back seat to a bigger question. To a bigger question. So what is the question that people should ask? We, and I say we meaning the church, like what should we be asking as a church? As Grace Church, as the collective church. And really, because where you ask your questions, that's where you focus your energy. The thing that you really question, that's where all of your energy goes. And in the New Testament, it becomes very clear the kind of questions the church asked when they are faced with a problem they couldn't solve or a natural disaster that they couldn't stop. A natural disaster, for whatever reason, God chose not to withhold, right? And so, so let's look at the church in Acts. And in this first church, we're going to be in Acts 8 and Acts 11. After Pontius Pilate, he gave the religious leaders what they wanted. He crucified Jesus. right? He ordered Jesus to be crucified. It became open season on believers, on these Jesus followers. And so religious leaders then, they said, okay, hey, Pontius Pilate he ordered the murder of Jesus, so now we can follow suit. And anybody that follows Jesus, we can go after. And we're not even going to take him before Pilate. We're not going to bother him. He's okay. He's basically given his approval for this. And so one of the first victims, in fact, the first victim, was a man who was chosen to distribute food to widows. His name was Stephen. And Stephen, not only was he good at distributing food, he had some logistic skills. He also was a very good speaker, right? And he was very good at convicting people, right? Of laying an argument against the Jewish religious leaders who were out to get all of the Jesus followers. And they bring him, and they arrest him. They take him before a trial, and he really gives them the business, right? He tells them where they are wrong. He tells them what Jesus meant for all humankind and where they missed it. And they get mad. Right? They get mad. They take off their, they're in their kind of formal wear, right? So they have a tunic, and then they have a coat over it, and they take off their coats because they got to get their arms warmed up because they're about to stone him. And it's not like dodgeball, right? I mean, it's, they throw you off a cliff or they put you somewhere and they hurl rocks at you. And the victim doesn't die immediately a lot of times. They're left to bleed. To bleed out. The animals gather around and they feast on the car. I mean, it's an awful, awful thing. And they do this to Stephen. And after they do this without any negative, there's no, Rome doesn't come down on them. Man, the religious leaders, they really start rounding up all the rest of them. All the rest of them that follow this Nazarene, this Jesus, right? The members of what it was called the Way. And in Luke, a doctor who writes an account of all this in Acts 8 says in chapter 8, verse 1, on that day, a great persecution broke out. So before, everybody was nervous, but it was kind of nervous about nothing. Well, nothing becomes something very quickly. A persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. So before, they had been meeting in the temple, the church. The first church was a mega church. They had thousands that were meeting in the temple. They were being taught by the apostles. They were gathering in homes in their groups. And this was going on day in and day out. I mean, it became such a logistical problem that the 11 disciples that were left, these 11 apostles, couldn't even take care of feeding all of the widows. I mean, so they had to go, and they appointed deacons to do this. Stephen is one of those. I mean, this is a big operation. The first church is a mega church. I mean, that's kind of crazy to think about. But now they're scattered, and so everybody but the 11 apostles are getting persecuted, and I'm not really exactly sure why, except for they were being hidden or they were walking around. They had already tried. There is all kinds of reasons that this could be. But everybody that's not those 11, they scatter. I mean, out of this, 11 out of this mega church, they scatter. And they go to different areas. And so here is what we don't read about the movement. What we don't read is that, hey, it ceased to be. All the leaders were rounded up and executed, and the church no longer existed. We don't read about that, right? I mean, we know that didn't happen because 2,000 years later, here we are. In fact, what happened was just the opposite. So they are scattered. The 11, they stick around. It says those who had, in verse 4, those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. So here's something that they don't have any control over. In fact, it's open season on Christians. And so they scatter, and they don't say, well, I guess we really learned our lesson. We just need to be quiet and not say anything. and we'll just live our lives and, whew, okay, glad that's over. No, it says they preached the word wherever they went. The fact that they couldn't meet in Jerusalem didn't dampen their enthusiasm, right? It turns out that persecution served as a catalyst to spread the faith in this region and beyond. And there's a guy that's in the center of all this persecution. His name is Saul of Tarsus, and you and I know him as the New Testament author Paul, the Apostle Paul. And he was going from house to house in Jerusalem, and he was dragging men and women out of their house, and he was torturing them and having them imprisoned. And when he ran out of Christians in the area of Jerusalem, because it says they scattered, when he ran out of them, he got himself deputized, and he goes off to Antioch, or to follow people in Damascus. And he's going there to bring them back to Jerusalem for trial. Now, this is kind of crazy because from Jerusalem to Damascus, one way is about a little over 300 miles. That's like walking from here to Amarillo, Texas, from Albuquerque to Amarillo. I mean, it takes 2 weeks to get there of walking. If you walk for 8 hours a day at 3 miles an hour, it's 12 and a half days of that. That's a long time just to go round people up. That is going out of your way to round people up because they are such a threat that they believe different than you. But Paul, he's on it, right? And on his road to Damascus, this 2-week trip, Jesus meets him on this road, and he becomes a follower of Jesus. He abandons his violent ways, and he joins Team Jesus. He joins Team Jesus, right? And that team, which looks like it was about to lose, which looks like it's about to be stamped out, snuffed out, put to death, it eventually declares victory, and it shapes Western civilization. And Paul writes a series of letters to New Testament churches that he had either established or knows about or helped establish that shapes the world that you and I know today. And so here's the picture. Christians are scattered. They are dispersed and they are despised. They are being tracked down. And the questions that they asked are not the questions that we ask, that I've heard the most. So what were they most concerned about? What did they focus on when they got together? Look in chapter 11, verse 19. It says, "Now those who were scattered because of the persecution that arose over Stephen traveled as far as Phoenicia and Cyprus and Antioch, speaking the word to no one except Jews. But there were some of them, men of Cyprus and Cyrene, who on coming to Antioch spoke to the Hellenists," these are the Greeks, "spoke to the non-Jewish people, preaching the Lord Jesus. And the hand of the Lord was with them, and a great number who believed turned to the Lord." Now wouldn't it be great if our COVID story, right, Grace Church's COVID story, that the church's COVID story, man, it says, hey, when the world was told to go home, when everybody was, when the staff came down and everybody scattered, when they couldn't do things when the church couldn't do things that they had done for years and years and years and decades, that the church looked for new opportunities to spread their faith in Jesus. Wouldn't that be great if that was, I sure hope that's our story. I hope years from now when they're telling the story, it's not like, oh, they were focused on the apocalypse. They were focused on the end times. They were focused on God's punishment and God's wrath. Oh, I hope they said, no. They looked for new opportunities. But back to their story, right? Back to their story. So you have these non-Jewish people embracing Jesus because people are telling non-Jewish people about Jesus. And so they need help, right? They need help. And so they call Barnabas in, and Barnabas goes and gets Paul. And it says, so Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul, right? So Barnabas goes and he looks, because they have, the church is exploding in Antioch. And so he looks for Saul, and when he had found him, he brought him to Antioch. And for a whole year, they met with the church, and they taught a great many people in Antioch, and the disciples were first called Christians. All this because of the disruption and the persecution of people 300 miles away from Jerusalem. So Antioch is 300 miles away from Jerusalem. Okay, Damascus is closer. But here's an interesting thing, right? They were so like these are people people were tracking them down. I mean, Saul is not by himself, but when he is tracking people down, there is a Jewish effort to track down these Christians and kill them, to round them up, to make them renounce Jesus. And so people, instead of going, I need to just stay quiet, I need to stay hidden, I need to stay by myself, I need to keep my mouth shut, they can't. They won't. So much that they are bringing more people to Antioch who understand this Christian faith, who have met Jesus. So, he goes off to Tarsus. Barnabas goes off to Tarsus to look for Saul, to find him, because he says, hey, these people need to understand the message of Jesus. And this guy, Saul, he really understands it. And it says the disciples were first called Christians. Now, let me tell you, Christians was a derogatory term. It means like, oh, those little Jesuses, right? Those little Christ followers. It's a derogatory term that we now wear proudly, or at least we try to wear it proudly. Sometimes it's hard because we have other folks that misrepresent it and give us a bad name in that. But Christian has become the word. But here's the story. It takes an interesting twist. In verse 27, it says, now in those days, prophets came from Jerusalem, down from Jerusalem to Antioch. They went, now they actually traveled north, but they came from a higher elevation to a lower elevation. And they go from Jerusalem to Antioch. And one of them named Agabus, okay, so they would regularly come down and they would prophesy. And so a man named Agabus stood up and foretold by the Spirit that a great famine all over the world, there would be a great famine all over the world. And this took place in the days of Claudius. Now, Luke is writing about this after it's happened. He's writing about this, and he is reminding them, hey, this took place in the days of Claudius. And they would go, oh, yeah, I remember that. Kind of like whenever, if you talk about September 11th, you're like, whenever George Bush was president. We talk, the Great Recession, right? When, the housing bubble during Obama. I mean, when you use who is in charge to give a reference for people that lived through it. And many of these people who would be reading this lived through that great famine that took place in the days of Claudius. He's the guy right before Nero. And so once again, we see how we see that these believers, they even get the news that here it is, it's coming. Right? And I remember COVID, there was a team from Grace Church in India. Whenever we heard about COVID for the first time, hey, here's this thing going on. And we were in India when they locked down Wuhan, and we thought, that's going to be really bad for them. Had no idea what it meant for us. Right? Oh, man. What is this thing? What is this thing? I mean, so it's, but they get foretold, hey, a famine is coming. A famine is coming. Now, we have no record that they said, is God judging the Roman Empire for their cruelty and their immorality? Is this a sign that the end is near? Is this the mark of the beast? Like what is it? They didn't ask any, we have no record of them asking any of those questions. Instead, they ask a more practical question. They asked a question. The questions they asked were keeping with the teaching of Jesus, right? And they were very practical, and they were in the here and now. And N.T. Wright, in God and the Pandemic, he writes this. Speaking of this, they ask these questions about who will be at risk, how can we help, who should we send, right? N.T. Wright says they were aware of a threat of a famine posed to their families and their livelihoods. Yet they paused to consider the implication for Jesus' followers in other areas who would be harder hit, specifically the plight of believers in Jerusalem. When this famine swept the empire, Jesus' followers in Judea would be particularly hard hit because they were already considered outlaws. Most of them couldn't work. They were poor and vulnerable. The believers in Antioch saw this as an opportunity to resource the lesser resourced Jesus followers in Jerusalem. Instead of sitting around talking about what this meant, they looked around and they got busy. Okay? Acts 11:29 says this: the disciples, as each one was able, decided to provide help for their brothers and sisters living in Judea. They did this, sending their gift to the elders by Barnabas and Saul. It's easy to miss this. And let me tell you, this is impossible for 21st century Americans to appreciate. Right? We can never fully understand this. Jerusalem was more than 300 miles away from Antioch. Again, 2 weeks. It doesn't take us 2 weeks to travel anywhere in the world. It took 2 weeks of solid travel. 2 weeks of solid, these two places were an eternity apart. They were very culturally different. They were very, this is like something happening on the other side of the world. Sound familiar? They were half a world apart. These Gentiles, they thought these Jewish people were very strange. And there were an infinite number of excuses, including, the famine's going to hit us too. Right? The famine's going to hit us, and but we know it's going to be worse for our brothers and sisters in this area, in Judea. They could have easily said, we better take care of ourselves. Right? We just need to care for our own. But there was something else at play here. Right? Now this thing that we call charity is very commonplace for us. But it was, and when we, it's a virtue, or at least it's been a virtue for a long time, for around 2,000 years. It was unheard of at the time. See, they had philanthropy, right? I mean, philanthropy's all, and that's where really rich people do grandiose gestures for the common people. They build a library, they build a bridge, they build a university, like they put their name on it. And it's for the people in their area. Kings and queens did this. Emperors did this. I mean, it said that the emperor in Rome, took care of 200,000 people. Well, why does he do that? It's not a selfless reason. I mean, for one, he's using a lot of people's tax money to take care of them. But he is also doing it so that things go well. Charity isn't that. Philanthropy is a good thing. I mean, this is not a knock against philanthropy. But charity is helping people who can never repay you. Charity is helping people who, even on their best day, cannot come close to doing what you are helping them with. It's a Christian virtue. Right? And so this generosity, this charity was unheard of. It was weakness. It was weakness in the Roman Empire. It wasn't commendable. It was considered foolish. Why would you help somebody that's never going to be able to help you in return? That's silly, right? It's eat or be eaten. It is survival of the fittest. It is do what's best for you. Take care of you and your own. But the Christians understood. It was the Christians understood that this new thing was brought about by Jesus. And when people started beginning to understand the implications of the gospel, when these people were presented with the message of Jesus, these Gentiles accepted, they had a sin debt they could never pay. And God had paid that debt through Jesus. And that was so counter to the message that they had been given, that they had grown up in their pagan religion that said, hey, God is fickle. And God sometimes the gods play with humans. They toy with them. They're like a mean older brother, not a loving father. And this was so foreign, right? And you had to keep these pagan gods satisfied. And if you didn't, then terrible things would happen. And sometimes the gods of these pagan religions just wanted to do terrible things because they were like mean little kids. Like burning, like a little kid with a magnifying glass burning ants for no reason. And so when they understood that Jesus loved them so much that he died, when they had a heavenly Father that was for them, who sent his own Son to take their place, to pay that debt that they would never be able to pay back, that it would be futile to even try to pay it back, something in their hearts changed. And they said, we want to be more like Jesus. And so we're going to give and expect nothing in return. We're going to give and expect nothing in return. Why? Because we love these people. And we read, we've heard John say it, or we've heard people quote John, the Apostle John, who writes the most famous verse in history, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave. He gave his only Son. And these are our brothers and our sisters, and we love them. They are our brothers and sisters in the faith, and we love them. And so what do we do to show we love? We give. Right? These are our people. These are Jesus' people. And so we love them, and so we give. And so they got the ball rolling, right? They started this thing. They introduced this new kind of giving, and it's called charity. And it's giving that relieves physical or financial distress of others without anything in return, anything expected in return, right? And this is the brand of giving that characterized Christianity, right? Christian charities. And it has since shaped the Western world. And so let me just tell you, from looking back at that first church, if you're a believer, if you are a follower of Jesus, can we not take a play out of the playbook from our first century brothers and sisters, right? And when calamity hits, and when things are going wrong, and when you've got when you have societal pressures and governmental pressures, and you have natural disaster weighing on you, instead of going, oh, is it the apocalypse? Is it the mark of the beast? Is it what is it? Am I doing something wrong? What is it? Is it punishment? Instead of trying to figure out why it's happening or how to make it stop, can we not look around and say, how can we help? Right? Instead of trying to figure out why the pandemic happened, who's to blame, figure out how it fits in the sovereignty of God, because good luck on that. That doesn't help anybody. At best, it leaves us debating. It leaves us pointing fingers. It leaves us like everybody else. And if the Apostle Paul was right, the pandemic is simply a global expression of a broken world awaiting the redemption. Right? He says in Romans that the whole world groans, waiting to be redeemed. And it's nothing new. We've always had calamity. We've always had sickness. We've always had governmental pressures and societal pressures. And so what do? Well, this year we want our Be Rich campaign to be an answer to that question. Now, if you're new around Grace Church, if you haven't been, for the last few years, we have been taking one portion of our year around this time of year. Once a year, we try to combine our resources corporately, and not just us, but we partner. I think there's over 100 churches this year doing it. And we try to really concentrate our resources, and we try to give and serve and love. Those are the three parts of Be Rich in the name of Jesus. And it's an opportunity to remind ourselves, and it's an opportunity to remind our community that everybody matters to God, whether God matters to them or not. And we call it Be Rich for a reason. We call it Be Rich. So Andy Stanley's church, North Point in Atlanta, started it, and they based it on this verse where Paul writes to his protege Timothy and says this in 1 Timothy 6:17. As for the rich in this present age, right? And that's us, let's be honest. 99% of us are rich in this present age. Charge them not to be haughty, not to be arrogant, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches. Don't be arrogant. Don't set your faith on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. That's good words. And it says this: they are to do good, to be rich in good works, and to be generous and ready to share. You see, the fact is, most of us, we want to make a difference. We want to make an impact, and we don't always know how. Be rich. Be rich is one way, right? And we try to make it simple. Right? If you are new around here, we try to make it simple. We partner with these incredible nonprofits. This year, we're partnering with Suriname and Children's Grief Center and Barrett Foundation. Suriname, it's for families experiencing homelessness in New Mexico. For Children's Grief Center, it is all about helping children overcome grief from the death. They provide support after the death of a loved one. And the Barrett Foundation, Barrett House provides shelter and supportive services to women and children experiencing homelessness who are displaced primarily from domestic violence. So we partner with those people because we want to tell them, you matter to God, no matter how God factors into your life. Last year, in the middle of the in the middle of lockdowns here in New Mexico, do you know what? We donated over 200 pounds of food. We had over 30 hours of pledge service back when, it was hard to find any place to serve. 30 hours of pledge service, and you guys gave $12,000 to these organizations. That's incredible. So we're doing it again. And the question should not be, how long is it going to go? Do I have to wear the mask? Do I not? Should I get the vaccine or not? Right? You're going to have to deal with all that, right? The biggest question in your mind and in mine should be, how can we help? How can we help? Who can we send? Where can we have an impact? You see, extravagant generosity. I remember to one of these organizations, again, in the middle of COVID, everything's kind of locked up. We had to call. We said, hey, we want to deliver a check to you guys. We want to deliver this. And it was hard to even, there was hardly anybody in the office. It was still, 10% capacity or something. And we go in, and we deliver the check, and thanks. It was a lot of money, but they thought it was because they hadn't received many donations. They had a lot of people needing things. They hadn't received many donations, and this organization called us and said, "Wait! Hey, you dropped off that check, and it was very nonchalant. You changed the game for us this year. You helped make You helped make possible in the middle of this pandemic when no one's going on. You helped, and that's what you did, Grace Church. And so we're asking you to do it again. Extravagant generosities toward others is the appropriate response to God's generous, extravagant generosity towards us. Right? And that shift that started 2,000 years ago had a ripple effect throughout the Roman Empire. And I hope that your generosity and Grace Church's generosity, it will make an impact here in our community. It will help Albuquerque. It will help spread the love of Jesus. And so this year, I want you to give. Go to the link. Go to the link and give. And if you've never given to a church, great. If you don't usually give to church, that's great. Here's what we're asking. We're asking you to give $39.95. $39.95. Would you give $39.95? Now, for some of you, it's like, that's a stretch, right? For some of you, you go, I don't even have that much in the bank, and that's okay. So if you don't have that much in the bank, pull the zero. Would you give $3.99? Because God's extravagant love to you. Now, some of you go, okay, $39.95, great, I can do that. Some of you can move the decimal place over, and you can give 300, or you can, almost 400. You can give almost 4,000. Who knows what you can do except for you? I don't know what you can do. And here's my promise: whatever comes for the Be Rich link, whatever comes through the Be Rich link, 100% of it goes out. We don't keep any of it. None of it goes to administrative cost. 100% of what we get goes to the organizations that we have partnered with, and you can read all about them at the link. Would you give? Right? Let's show our community, let's show Albuquerque that our faith is more than just singing songs. Our faith is more than just sermons, right? Our faith is more than just a social hour once a week. But our faith involves us being extravagantly generous with others because God was extravagantly generous with us. Ready, set, go. Be rich.